that your mobile phones are switched off. Thank you.
Yesterday we had 4 verses from the first sukta of the first mandala of the Veda, and therefore we had some inkling into what Sri Aurobindo calls the psychological interpretation of the Veda. But we can dwell a little on this question of psychological sense, psychological meaning, even what Sri Aurobindo calls symbolism. The one example that we took was Kavikratu. This is a word which we emphasized yesterday while describing the nature of Agni. And we said Agni is Kavikratu. And Sri Aurobindo points out that Sayana, who is interpreting in a ritualistic manner, translates this word Kavikratu as one who is active in the ritual. Kratu is the active, and Kavi is the one who knows rituals or who is engaged in rituals, and says Kavi Kratuhu is one who is active in the ritual. And Sri Aurobindo, when it translates, he says Kavi Kratu means whose will towards action is that of the seer. There it is active in the ritual, that is one ritualistic interpretation. The same word Sri Aurobindo says, one whose will towards action, that is Kratu, will towards action, is of that of a seer, Kavi. Not one who is engaged in ritual. It makes a lot of difference, one who is active in ritual and one who is a seer. One who is active in ritual can be also a mechanical action. Perhaps even a robot can do, if it is programmed, a robot also can do active in ritual, the same ritual to be repeated at certain timings, and it can be done by a robot. There is no psychological necessity in it. But a seer is quite different. You cannot make a robot a seer. It's a different dimension altogether. This is one example to show what is the difference between a ritualistic interpretation and a psychological interpretation. What is psychology? And why Sri Aurobindo calls his interpretation psychological interpretation? Psychology is understood in several different ways. There is in the West today a school of psychology which is called behaviorism. There is another school which is called Gestalt School of Psychology. A third is what is called functional psychology. A fourth is called structural psychology. And then there is a school which is called psychoanalysis, personalistic psychology. There are many schools of psychology in the West, and the word psychology therefore does not become very easily clear when we say psychological interpretation. But in the Indian context, psychology has been, you might say, the most prominent study right from the beginning to the present day. Except at a given time, in an intermediate period, the study of psychology became extremely poor. It is now again that we have to re-establish, as it were. In fact, today in most of the universities, Indian psychology is still not being taught. What is taught is only Western psychology. And even in Western psychology, there is no certainty because of so many schools of psychology. The basic point is that there is a phenomenon of consciousness. This is the central point in psychology. The phenomenon of consciousness. And how the consciousness operates. This is the basic theme of psychology. Study of consciousness, study of the operation of consciousness, the study of states of consciousness, the study of different combinations that can be created in psychological components, analysis of consciousness, synthesis of the various elements of consciousness, utilization of these combinations, application of these combinations, and whatever results are obtained by the application, study of the results, and trying to see whether some other results can be produced, higher results can be produced. In fact, this is the basic study, whether Western psychology or Indian psychology. Both of them have this basic point. According to behaviorism, consciousness does not exist. All that is happening, what we call thinking, he says thinking is nothing but now speaking, it's silent speaking. Speaking is a physical act. Now, according to behaviorism, there is no such thing as thinking as such. When you start speaking, mother tells you that this is this object, you repeat the word. Then afterwards you go on talking, whatever you think, they don't use the word thinking, whatever you talk, you go on talking. When a child learns a language, he goes on talking. One day father or mother says, I'll slap you now if you talk. So the child stops talking, but goes on silently talking within himself. This silent talking becomes more and more complex, and that is what we call thinking. Now this is the account that behavioristic psychology gives of what we call thinking process. In India, however, when you read the text like the Vedas, which is regarded as the oldest extant document in the world, not only in India, but the whole world, there is no text available in the whole world comparable to the Vedas. And such a huge, it's not only at one stroke, you have got such a huge body of text. And if you read the Vedas, you find that these composers of Vedas must have not only studied psychology, but must have studied psychology to such a length and breadth and such height, such depth, that these concepts which are present in the Vedas could come only when extraordinary experiments would have been carried out, which you can't even today imagine, and even today we are not ready to experiment upon. This is how this Veda has to be seen. if you regard Veda as a text which only tells you how to do yajna and what are the vidhis to be performed at given times, it will be still valuable, but if you can show that there are concepts in Veda which manifest a tremendous psychological understanding of the human consciousness, and not only as it operates here, but how it can operate at different levels of consciousness, which are even what may be called supreme levels. As I had said in the beginning, this concept, Satya Chitra Sravastama, is a psychological concept. And Sri Aurobindo has said how ritualistically it can be brought down to a lower level. Shravas, instead of thinking of Shravas in the real sense of Shruti, Sayana says Shravas means fame. So Agni is famous. To say that Agni is famous is one way of interpreting the same word. And Sri Aurobindo says Shravas is the inspired forms of knowledge. Now you see the distinction when you say Shravas is a word which indicates inspired forms of knowledge. I have given the example of great poets. Great poets, when they reach a state of inspiration, they don't fabricate words, they don't fabricate lines and expressions. All that is in the poetic formulation, rhythmic word, the vision, and the style, all the three are combined together in a poet of a high level, and when he utters even one sentence, all the three are present, combined together. The vision, the style, and the rhythmic word. The main distinction between prose and poetry is that in prose, you do not care for rhythms. This distinguishing feature of poetry is that it is rhythmic. Unless there is a rhythmic word, it's not poetry. It may be anything else. Even there are many good prose writers whose writings also have rhythmic form. Like Plato, for example. That is why his prose is called poetic prose. Because when you read his prose, you have the rhythm. There is a kind of beat. Now, a good poet does not try to see whether the beat is there or not. When he is inspired, the very word, it automatically flows out. That is the mark of a poet. He doesn't labor. He is inspired. He is so inspired, the words themselves begin to dance, as it were, and then automatically take their place to express the vision that he wants to express. In Nal and Damayanti of Vyasa in Mahabharata,